I'm Professor Alex Nunn, I'm Dean of Research here at Leeds Trinity, and it's my great pleasure tonight to welcome you all in the room to this evening's inaugural lecture, and also there are many people joining us online also. Here at Leeds Trinity, we're in the midst of a strategic transformation, and research is very much at the heart of that transformation. It's always been a part of the university since our founding in 1966 and becoming a university in 2012. Our current investment in research and research leadership is something that's going to shape, or you're going to see the results of that investment tonight in our excellent inaugural lecture. Our inaugural lectures are a chance to welcome new professors to our research community here at Leeds Trinity, but also to recognise our existing colleagues and their excellence in research, in teaching leadership, and also in thought leadership in professional practice. And tonight's lecture will give us a great insight to that work. Now, it's my job tonight to give you the notices, so I've written down fire, alarm, toilets, staff, refreshments. Okay, so we're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the fire alarm goes off, please follow the green signs and go and take the nearest route to outside. There'll be people out there to help you. There are toilets down the corridor. If you need anything, there's plenty of staff around. Please do ask, and please do join us afterwards for some refreshments where we can all catch up together and discuss tonight's lecture. So you've heard enough from me. Let me hand over to Professor Malcolm Todd to introduce our inaugural lecture this evening.
Thanks, Alex, so much for the introductions. My name is Malcolm Todd. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor and Provost here at Leeds Trinity University. And it is genuinely a real pleasure to welcome you here this evening for the inaugural lecture by Leigh. So just before I've got my script, I will read the script, but just on a personal note, I joined the university about 3.5 years ago during the pandemic period. And, you know, when you're new to a university, it's always, those first few months are really quite interesting, getting to know different people and how the university works. And I think the first person that reached out to me was Leigh and said, I want you at this event in Birmingham on Friday night. Can you make it? And it really was as direct as that. And I thought, well, this is going to set the tone for my relationship with Leigh. But I was really grateful for Leigh reaching out in such a way to welcome me into the university and to get me to meet some of her colleagues and networks. So it's a real pleasure to see Leigh's career trajectory over the last 4 years at Leeds Trinity University, and really delighted to be here tonight, just saying a few words on behalf of the university. So Leigh is a Deputy Dean in the School of Education here at Leeds Trinity University, a significant role. Leigh is a former, and you will probably find this out in the lecture tonight, a former science teacher, has been working in a leading role in science education in higher education since 2006. She's dedicated, and we see this in her work across the university and externally, in educational excellence, and is currently, a really important role, the co-chair of the Association for Science Education. Leigh co-founded the Climate Adapted Pathways in Education, and in this role she leads a visionary initiative propelling over 90 schools into evidence-informed action in response to the climate crisis. It doesn't stop there. Leigh is also a profound impact on students champion across the UK. This is through her work in key educational campaigns, collaborating with the BBC, amongst others, on tech. Leigh has been a co-creator of their Blue Planet live teaching resources and the sustainability-focused programme, The Regenerators, which I've seen and is fantastic. A strategic partnership with BASF which is a world-leading chemicals company, really does speak to the values of this university in terms of our close collaboration with industry partners. The work, which is tailored to local school contexts and curriculum needs, has earned Leigh a national award for her leadership in this area and her contributions to widening access and participation. She's a true champion of diversity and social mobility, and I think we will see that in her lecture tonight. Leigh in the lecture will harness her expertise, her passion for science in education and climate change education, and we'll see a deep dive into the intricate entanglements of the context, culture and climate in moulding the professional practice of teachers across school leaders. Leigh's journey will illuminate how people, pedagogy, socioeconomic factors and notions of privilege are woven together to influence the experience of children and young people within the educational landscape. So, it's with great pleasure that I introduce Professor Hoath to you this evening to give her lecture.
Thank you, Alex, and thank you, Malcolm. It was a Wednesday. It wasn't a Friday. Two things occurred to me today that, in light of standing here this evening. And one was, I'm going to be behind a lectern, so I don't know why I spent as long choosing which shoes I was going to wear. And the second one is, you're the strangest audience I've ever spoken to. And when I was thinking about this, it's who's in the room. And when I look round, you'll understand what I mean. When we teach a group of year nines, we teach a group of students, we speak to a group of head teachers. And what I've got in the room tonight is really problematic because I've got everybody. So I've got friends that I've known since university. I've got friends online that I've known for 30 years. We've got current students, and it's absolutely fantastic. I'm so delighted. Where are you? I can't see you. There we are. Hello, people. We've got current third-year students here. I've got former students going back, I don't know, 11 years maybe. I've got people that I'm working with, colleagues currently. I've got my squidgy little children there, the VIPs of the evening. That's them. So I now suddenly feel a whole lot of pressure to get this to land in ways that I hadn't anticipated when I sort of started off planning it. I want to ask a question of you first, which is, can you just pop your hand up if you have not been to an inaugural professorial lecture before? This is good. Did any of you Google it before you came to find out what to expect? Because I did, right? So I've been to a few. And Alex has spoken about research, and I'm going to stand here and say, I'm not a researcher, okay? So you might want to leave now if that's what you're expecting. But it really made me think about what I do, and I had a panic of, I've not got something to talk about that's meaningful enough. And that will not be a surprise to a number of you in the room. And then I listened to Malcolm going, that person's done all right, haven't they? They've done a few little bits and pieces. But I want to start off talking about this photograph. And this photograph, we use it quite a lot because it was one of those we went, oh, that's quite a good photograph. But it's about 4 hair colours ago, probably about a stone and a half. And the reason it's all blurry and atmospheric has nothing to do with making it look nice. It's because it was for a science education thing. And then when we went, that's the photo, and looked back, I'm standing beside the French and German dictionaries in the library. So the only way we could manage it was to actually then go, right, let's make it a little bit blurry. So I've done a new slide. So, and I apologise, Lewis, for not seeking permission to use this one. And I think this is a bit more me. I feel a bit more comfortable with this, and I'll explain where this photograph comes from in a moment or two. And I have to do something, because working with Amy, who's our head of school, she's taught me one thing, and it's think back from the court case, okay? So The exec are giggling. It's nervous. And so when I was talking about this, Imagineering, and I will explain that word in a little while, somebody was saying, where did you get it from? And I said, I'm not entirely sure, but I've heard it before. It's not my word. I'm not going to claim it. And then when I did a bit of Googling, it just happens to be trademarked by Disney. So there's no such thing as bad publicity, is there? Of all the people to end up in court with, Disney's a good one. So I will talk about what their Imagineering process is and why I think it's relevant. As I say, my professorship is in professional practice, and it was one of the first awarded in this university alongside Tony, who is over there, and Danielle, who's here. And we were the first professional practice professors. That's quite difficult to say when you're a little bit nervous. But what I want to talk to you about is my journey to that as much as anything, because I think sometimes we see people doing things that appear to be the finished, they've done this. They might be a bit rough around the edges, but they're there. And we don't see what's gone into that. And I think it's important that I share that. That's part of my journey. So I thought, well, what have I done? What am I going to talk about? Because I quite often say I'm not a proper prof. And Malcolm heard me say it recently and told me off for it. But what I did was I went back to the notes that I made for when I was preparing for my interview. And this is what I found. So what's important is that sense of actually exploring pedagogy in practice, I believe, has value. Okay, it's not completely divorced from research. We use it. We're drawing upon that all the time. There's an interrelationship there that's really important. My background is science education. That's where my heart is. And from that, there has grown an interest in developments around sustainability and climate change education. I said in this that I will draw upon research-informed practice and act as that broker, as that conduit between research and practice. And what was really reassuring when I looked at this, because I haven't looked at it since May last year, was I've done it. So there's a little bit we thought, oh, that's okay. We've done that little bit. Malcolm mentioned entanglement. Nothing that we do is straightforward. I think that's sort of one of those things you're missold as an adult, isn't it? So what I want to do is highlight the entangled nature of what we do, and that's part of the story and how they all weave together. So I want to talk to you about plans. At a wedding in April this year, it's all right, I'm not going to tell all the stories. At this wedding, one of my colleagues in the room sat down. We may have had a glass of fizz in our hands at the point of conversation, and she said, was this your plan? What was your plan to become a professor? And I said, I didn't have one. This was not in my plan. When I started here at LTU in 2017, I remember sitting down in one of my first meetings with my line manager at the time and him saying, Leigh, what are your plans in 3 years' time? And I didn't have the heart to say, my twins are 3.5 years old. My plan is to get out of the house in the morning and to pick them up on time at night. And it ends there. That's it. That's the extent of my plans. So I think it's interesting where our plans come from. And there's one plan that I will mention later on that I did actually decide on. But influence is really important. And I would not be standing here now if it wasn't for Ed, who's snuck in at the back. Noted, saying to me one day walking along the corridor, I think you should apply for a professorship. And I laughed and said, are you kidding? Or what's to that effect? And I went and got the criteria to prove him wrong. I looked at it and thought, maybe. And the one person who has always stood by, yes, Leigh, this is a good idea, or no, Leigh, absolutely not, is John Leach. And I said to him, so I sort of steadied myself for this conversation with him, where I was like, right, John, I've made a decision and I've got a plan, and you need to listen to the whole thing before you give me a view in it. I said, I think I'm going to apply for a professorship. And he said, that's a great idea. And I was like, I was armed for the fight and didn't have to have it. Influence of people is so important in what we do. There'll be other people that I mention tonight. There'll be people that I don't. It doesn't mean you're not influential. It just means you don't fit into this particular narrative. Opportunity is a fantastic word. It's coined by Ricky Fulton. Anybody who's Scottish online or in the audience will know of Ricky Fulton. And he talks about, in one of his scenes, taking the opportunity. And it rings true. It's about taking opportunities as they arise, but maybe there's a chance, maybe there's a risk associated with them. And I think it's really important that we take those. And I am terrible for not being able to say no. And it gets me into a lot of trouble when I go home and go, I'm just going to go and do this. And I get, why? Why are you doing that? You're so busy. I know, but. And it is. It's one of the best things, but it's also, I see, it's one of my flaws. In the title of today, we've got climate, context and culture. I'm not going to talk about those discreetly. They will filter through everything that I'm talking about. They're really important. My context, my culture is really important in terms of how I have got to where I am and doing what I'm doing. And the final question is, why are Imagineering? So Imagineering is the creative medium which Disney used to get from where they are as an idea to the theme park, to the movie, to the whatever it is that they're creating. And in terms of climate change education, I think we really do have to Imagineer a future, because we've got to be a bit Disney about it. We've got to be hopeful, we've got to be optimistic, and we've got to hope that we're going to reach something that is really, really good. So I'm now going to tell you the story of Climate Adapted Pathways for Education. So this is an alliance that was co-founded with Hina, she's over there. And it's an alliance which has a vision. And that vision is for ensuring that all children and young people have the knowledge and skills to protect our increasingly fragile planet. And that's quite a big ask. So it all started in COP26 back in 2021. And Hina and I were in a restaurant in Glasgow. And you may get a theme here, but there was a glass of wine involved. And this DFE had just dropped the Sustainability and Climate Change Strategy. And we looked and we were like, well, that's great. It's good that it's here, but it's not good enough. And what we were really concerned about, and anybody who's been in education for any length of time will know this, where you have a strategy that goes to delivery and falls flat on its face 2 or 3 years later, because there's been no thought into how we're resourcing this, how we're going to do it, how we're going to make this meaningful. So at that point, we said, what we need is a group of people together that are from early years, primary, secondary, industry, charities, higher education. So we then set about stalking some people online and saying, will you come and have a conversation with us in January? And they all went, yeah, okay. Like, really? So we created a response to that. Now, the reason that we were at COP26 was because of the BASF work. And that came about because I met Dr. Mackey, he's hiding over in the corner, at another conference in 2017, and we were talking about the outreach work that BASF do. Some of you are old enough to remember cassette tapes. I'm not making eye contact with anyone. Those of you who aren't, this is what they look like. It's even got BASF on it. So we look at what they do on the site. We create outreach experiences which really neatly align with the national curriculum. So these children are coming in, the science that they're learning in school, they're seeing the science that's happening on the site and going, that's the same thing. Do you know, this is real science that we are doing here. So again, it was because of that that I ended up at COP26 having this discussion with Hina. And the other thing I have to say, just looking at these arrows, my geography is appalling, okay? So I think the phrase is these are for illustrative purposes only as to where these sites actually are. There's a few more. So, like I say, that's sort of that entanglement, isn't it? That sense of if I hadn't done that, then I wouldn't have done this, etc., etc. Now, they mentioned the award. I brought it. This is like show and tell, isn't it, for grown-ups? This is my award. Do you want a photo of this? Hang on. Excuse me. Yeah. So this award was for outstanding contribution to widening participation, diversity and inclusion in STEM. And I got a lovely day out down at the House of Lords to collect it. And then a couple of weeks later, this email arrives that says, as part of your award, you also get to choose a visit somewhere. And I was like, oh, that's exciting. And then I looked, first thing I did was look at the dates. So there was a number I couldn't make, but the one that I could make was Bulby Potash Mine. So I happened to bump into Lewis in the corridor and said, I've just had this email that says that I can go down this potash mine. And if any of you ever speak to Lewis, 90% of his sentences start with, I was listening to a podcast on, and he says, I've just been listening to a podcast on potash. And I was like, are you joking? He says, I'd love that. So we went, and hence the photograph of us in our high-vis and hard hats. We didn't go down the mine to look at anything to do with potash. We went down to find dark, where's Caroline? What is it? Dark matter. That, yeah, doesn't exist. So it was just career goals, you know, that was a high. So then what happened was we had written this report, Hina and I, that when I first looked, I thought we're looking at probably, you know, A3 folded in half, that sort of size. 72 pages later, we have this response. And I went to the Wellington Festival of Education, which is approximately there. And I walked into what I would call a marquee. Jonathan would call a tent, as I prefer to call it, a marquee. And I talked about basically the essence of what was in this report. And afterwards, Jonathan, who's an executive head teacher of 4 schools in Norfolk, said to me, this is really important. I didn't know what I needed, but this is it. And he was the first person who gave us any real feedback from an outside perspective on this. And I remember speaking to Hina and saying, we've got something. Now we know we've got something that we can work with. And he's still involved with us. So then we launched the report in London in one of the hottest Julys that ever has been. And then we decided we needed to move CAPE forward, and we'd had all sorts of lovely things happen. We had a branding exercise pro bono by the lady who designed the Pizza Express logo. We were adopted by so many people. So we decided, I said to Hina, I'm going to come up to Stirling, got a couple of days at half term, and we'll do a bit of work and we can, you know, go back to the student union. And she said, shall we just have a small meeting while you're here? That small meeting resulted in people travelling from Cambridge, from people who were on holiday. Jen joined us from her holiday. Other people arranged to go on holiday to Stirling on the basis that they could then come to this meeting. So the travel was immense. We had all of these really powerful, experienced, committed people in a room. And we had it at Stirling, and it was really important because if I go back to 1994, that's when Hina and I met at university. I've got a friend who's online who needs to know at this point I'm only going to talk about the stories that we can talk about. So there's several that you don't want airing in front of the exec. So Hina and I met, and we were doing similar-ish, biology-ish degrees. And then what happened was, again, and just another twist, that messy situation of entanglement. I opted to do French as my 3rd subject, and Hina opted to do history. And nobody at any point said, well, that doesn't fit with sciences at all, what you're doing that for, until we got to the end of our first year, and they went, you've not got enough credits to get your degree. So in 2nd year, you're going to do environmental science, 1st year and 2nd year to catch up. So Hina and I spent a lot of time working together on this, going, I can't believe we've got to do all this. But anyway, we've got more credits for a degree than any other students. But Stirling holds a really important place, and that's where this all started, if I think about it. We now work with 6 multi-academy trusts, over 90 schools. The context, the cultures and climates within those schools is so different. And what we do is we really work with the school leaders and the multi-academy trust leaders and the CEOs and the CEOs and others to help in terms of the leadership and the state of this. It's not about the enthusiastic teacher. Okay, this is about making a real difference. We've developed a Climate-Wise Schools programme, which is now in its 5th out of 6 months of running. We've got nearly 50 school leaders and subject leaders who are taking part in this. It's just immense what has come from that glass of wine in Glasgow in 2021. The crisis that we face currently is genuinely crisis. There's a real urgency to what we need to be able to do. Okay, the decisions that we make now in this decade will have influence over the next 1,000 years. Okay, it's really important that we are working on this now. This is the IPCC report. It's not happy reading. Okay. We've got issues around equity and inclusion. What we've got is a situation where we know that there are differences that are drawn out of politics. There's differences in terms of economics. It's just really, really messy. And what we know is that the people who are most affected by climate change, those that are most vulnerable, are those who are usually the people who are making the least contribution. And we know this in terms of global north, global south, but we also see this mirrored in communities. So one of the things we need our schools to do is to take into account those vulnerabilities and to act on those. So, some thoughts about this. We have got to do something soon. We've got to make something that gives us a livable future for everybody. It's got to happen now because of the impact it will have for years and years to come. And that last point about the vulnerable communities is so important, because what we do know is that climate change education is quite often mispitched. It's pitched at those who are more advantaged than socially disadvantaged. So, this is the extent of the issue. When I first heard the phrase eco-anxiety, I thought, really? The extent of it is massively concerning. So what we've got is, this is a survey of over 2,000 young people. And you can see that in 2022, top of the list was the thing that they were most worried about was the environment. Now, understandably, that's dropped, but it's still a significant percentage of children and young people who are concerned about the environment. And what this points out, actually, is they're not just worried about that. There are layers and layers of concern and anxiety that children and young people face. The rising prices, the environment, crime, inequality, pandemics. That's a lot. That feels really heavy for our children to be growing up with. So what do they think about it? They want high-quality climate change education across all subjects, and that's really important. It's not just to be shoehorned into science, it's not just to be picked up in geography, and it's not to be some fluffy thing that goes on top of absolutely everything. That was a survey of just over 1,000 children aged 14 to 18. And this survey, this is really quite an interesting publication, because this is from the Lancet. Okay, so suddenly we've got a medicalisation of what's going on. And actually, if you look at this, we have got 80% of our children and young people who are moderately to or extremely worried about the climate and its impacting on some of their ability to function. And that's not a happy place for any of us. It gets brighter, this story. I'll just put that out there now. So what we are doing with the professional development programme, see, I've done that thing where I start to talk about we, and I get told off for saying we because I'm meant to be saying I, but my problem is that I've not done it on my own. So I'll say I, and Hina's, we've talked about this, it's okay. So what I'm doing as part of the Climate Wise programme is we're really working with those school leaders and those subject leaders to try and make things better across the school, so that the culture across the school is one that absolutely embraces climate change education. The problem with your enthusiastic teacher who goes, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make the difference in the school, is that when they leave, all of that goes with them. Okay, and that's just not good enough. That's not what our children and young people need, and it's not what they want. This quote is quite lengthy, but I wanted you to see this. This is one example of the reflections that the teachers have given us. This is, well, you'll see who it's from, an experienced leader in school. Okay, and this is one of the reflections that's come out through the Climate Wise programme. When Jonathan first read the report, he emailed me with a phrase that has stuck with me, which is that the report that Hina and I created highlighted the paucity in his own thinking. And we've got really experienced, well-qualified, invested people who still don't know what to do because they're not being enabled to do it. And that's the bit that's worrying. And that's what CAPE is really trying to push forward. Knowledge is really important. Okay, it's important that our children know more and our teachers know enough to be able to teach this. But the important line for me in this is the last one. that the experts share the reasons for constructive hope. And it's really important that actually we have a hopeful outlook on this for our children and for the rest of us. So we're working as well with a professor from Quebec University. We call her Professor Catherine because none of us can adequately pronounce her surname and we don't want to do it injustice. But there's a few things in this that I want to point out. She talks about to enable children to cope, we have to foster hope. We've got to balance that emotional well-being and prevent activist burnout. Do you know how many children think that they feel that they've got to be the next Greta? And they don't all want that. And we've got to be really mindful about creating activists because whilst it raises an agenda, it doesn't necessarily bring about the change that we need it to. Because if you take, for example, Just Stop Oil, blocking the M25, how many people in those cars were thinking, do you know what, you're right, I shouldn't be sitting in my car? How many of them were thinking, I'm late to pick up my family, I'm late for a doctor's appointment, I'm late for work? Okay, so it's balancing that. It's about balancing the agenda with activism. But we need to equip children with coping skills and we need to promote hope. This quotation, I think, is really interesting. And I just want you to read it. And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. What we want is we want sustainability and climate change to be the fabric of our schools. We want it to be the DNA. We want it to be really part of what we have in schools and in education. The alarming bit is that's nearly 20 years old. And again, I showed this to a head teacher and they said, what the hell have we been doing for 20 years? And it's a very, very fair question. The problem is, in schools, there are so many tensions. We've got reduced budgets, we've got increased costs of running schools, we've got children who have needs that have to be met, we've got children that are perhaps, unstable home lives, all of those things, the marking, the assessment, everything gives us competing tensions. So when we come along and say, so actually, can you just then teach this? It's not necessarily going to happen. We've got an urgency to address the issue, but what we want is implementation that takes time. So we need to say, yes, this is a really urgent issue. We've just talked about the urgency, but to then say, but we also need to slow this down and get it right first time. And if we then get it right, we're not going to have that situation where in 3 or 4 years, it's wasted. It's not something that we have to teach. So how do we prioritise it in terms of, we're held accountable. We've got to cover the national curriculum. We've got to be ready for whatever assessment. So how do we actually manage that? That's a real problem. It's really hard. The science behind it is not straightforward. It's really challenging. So we need people to know that. We need our teachers to know that. We need our young people to know it. But actually, what people want is a quick fix. But the quick fix isn't going to work. And we have a resource-driven agenda. What we have at the moment is everybody out there is creating resources for climate change and sustainability. And actually, if we go back to the culture of our school, what CAPE positions is, you need to work out what you want your children to know. You need to work out how you are going to teach it for the context of your children, young people in school, and then you find the resource that best meets that need. What we see is people going, that looks like a fantastic resource, and then going, I'm going to teach that, and then the learning comes afterwards. And that doesn't feel like the right way to be doing things. I'm going to tell you a little story, or two, maybe three. What we want children to see themselves as part of this solution. In science, we teach a lot about dead white men, and that doesn't, people, our children in school don't look at that and go, oh yeah, that could be me. What we need is these windows and mirrors for the children to be able to see themselves in what we're teaching, which is why that context and culture within the school is really, really important. When we position solutions to climate change, we quite often talk about things that are prohibitively expensive for the majority. We talk about electric cars. We talk about solar panels. Schools that do the right thing by having a wrapper-free Friday. What if you are one of the 2.1 million families that are accessing a food bank and don't have a choice what your food's wrapped in? Okay, so it's really problematic, and it's really quite middle class in terms of the solutions that are presented. When I started teaching in one of the most socially disadvantaged areas of Leeds, and not far up the road was Leeds Grammar School. The difference in those two areas is immense. We taught the same science, how we taught it was differently. When we talk about real-world examples, we can't use the same ones for children that are in those different environments. Okay, so when we've got our schools in Norfolk who've got a wind farm just out there, that's a context. We can't use that in the middle of North Yorkshire. Okay, we should be thinking about this, the things that they can see, the things that are meaningful to them. The BASF work, I want to come back to that. So one of the things we do is we ask our children, before they come on site, to draw scientists. And 96% of children, if you ask them to do that, will draw some sort of Einstein figure. Didn't know his first name was Bob. But, so this is an example from the first science experience that I did. And this girl drew herself at the end of it because she started to see that she could be that person. And that was really, really important. Role models are very important. I'm going to tell you a very personal story just now. Amble, which is approximately in that bit, just there, somewhere near that pink blob. I was there, I can't remember when, 18 months ago now. But long ago, it'll be 2 years. Where is Charlotte? Charlotte's there. With Charlotte Wright and 2 other friends. And they were sitting on the sofa. I was sitting on a chair, and there might have been a glass of wine. And they were talking about their mums and what their mums have done and achieved and the roles that they had. And I sat there and I just thought, I didn't have that. I'm a generation behind you. I won't be the only person in the room that's first generation university. I've got 3 older brothers who didn't go either, so it's not even the generation. I was the first person in my family to go. And I never had that role model. My mum gave up work when she married my dad. And she looked after the children. And I'm not being critical of that. But I never had that role model. And this is the only plan that I really made, which was I sat there and I said, my children will be able to talk differently in 30 years' time than I can about my mum. And like I say, that's not being critical, but I want to know that they can say that I tried to make things a bit better in my work than if I hadn't done it, and that they could have that conversation. And it means nothing to them now, and they're looking at me as if to say, what are you wittering on about women? But in 30 years' time, this will come back to them, and that's them. There, I did get permission for this photograph. And I think it's so important, that role model, that person, that seeing yourself as the solution has got to be part of what we do. So we need to make the teaching and the context of this relevant to our young people. So what does the education of hope look like? We need to improve children's opportunities. What we want is collective operational climate literacy. We want them to understand what it is that we're trying to do, not just more recycling, not just more litter picking. We need high quality, well-crafted curriculum. That means going back and thinking about what we're going to teach. So looking at that national curriculum that lots of teachers haven't looked at for many, many years, and going, actually, how can I do this with a climate change lens? They need to have knowledge and skills. Now, that's not just enough, because we have taught about the knowledge around drugs in GCSE biology for many, many years. Doesn't stop them taking them. Okay? So what we need them is to make informed decisions. We need to give them the knowledge, the skills to be able to advocate in a way that they can't seem to at the moment. It needs to be really, really informed. And that comes down to this idea of curriculum. I love this quote because this actually makes the curriculum about teachers and not about the pupils in the first instance. And I think that's something that we miss a little bit in education. It's got to be for the teachers first and foremost. CAPE has devised a framework, principles around what a curriculum should look like. It needs to be coherent. It needs to be something that is sequenced, that is well planned, that offers progress for our children, and it's well crafted. It needs to tell a story, and that might be a story of carbon, which isn't mentioned in the primary national curriculum. Doesn't mean that it shouldn't be. It needs to be authentic, it needs to resonate, it needs to be something that they can say, actually, yes, that speaks to me. We want it to be ambitious. Okay, it's got to be ambitious, it's got to be something that results in that collective operational literacy, that they can actually go and do and make more informed decisions as a result of it. And it needs to be enriched. It is not just about the teachers having to do this themselves. There are plenty of other businesses and industries and people out there who can support this. But wouldn't it be much better if they were longer term relationships who actually understood the culture and the context of those schools and brought something far more meaningful along? What we don't want is solely having eco clubs or climate ambassadors, because they are generally accessed by the more advantaged children. Then we come on to the pedagogical superpower, which is what all teachers have. I like how I did this, here we've got a pedagogical superpower here. And this is about the interactions. It's about how we take something that is on paper and we turn it into something amazing in the classroom. So it's that interaction between the theory and the practice of teaching. It's about doing that in the context of your school and your own personal experiences as well. It's about being subject specific. So where can we link really meaningful knowledge around climate change with science, with geography, with art, with music? Okay, and that's not the same as shoehorning it in, it's those meaningful experiences. About outdoor learning, where is that pedagogical content knowledge? It's a political issue. We have got to be impartial as we teach. But what we've got to do is recognise that the children in front of us are subject to political and social influence. And it's how we then push back perhaps a little bit on that when we have that conversation where the children come in and says, but my dad says this isn't real. And you can't say, well, your dad's wrong, because it just doesn't work. I've said it's got to be subject specific, but can it also be multidisciplinary? Can we think of those subjects as having permeable walls where we start to draw upon the connections between those different subjects? But I also think that pedagogy is an answer, because what it does is it allows our teachers to be able to engage and interact with curriculum in a way that makes it real for our children and young people, drawing upon those influences and making a difference to their lives. Education, and I think absolutely everything that we have talked about, is based on relationships. For me, they are absolutely the foundation of teaching and learning. CAPE would not exist if it wasn't for the relationships that we have with our school leaders, with the other supporters that we have. There's about, Hina, tell me, how many different people are in the Alliance now? 25, including the Natural History Museum, including a number of multi-academy trusts, lots and lots and lots of people. But they're based on relationships. They've all come to us. They've all come to us and said, we like what you're doing. We want to be part of this. So those relationships are so important when it comes to how we interact with children, how we're interacting with our schools. They're just so valuable. No one achieves anything by themselves. And I've put the asterisk because you'll all go, but there was this person who did. And my question is, would you want to go for a pint with them? Okay? So I can't say nobody ever, but it's about that collaboration, isn't it? When I got my professorship, which was just over a year ago, it was I found out that I'd been successful in the application. I sat down with Malcolm and said, what should be the most substantive change in my role now? And he said, it's about leadership. And that made me panic a little bit, because my first thought, well, I'm not a leader. That's not my thing. And what I did was, I was given a book by Brené Brown. And very early on in this book, I read a section, which I'm going to show you just now. And she's talking to her daughter who's having some trouble with some friends at school. And she says this: "We trust people who have earned marbles over time in our life. Whenever someone supports you or is kind to you or sticks up for you or honours you, honours what you share with them as private, you put marbles in the jar. When people are mean or disrespectful or share your secrets, marbles come out. We look for the people who over time put marbles in and in and in until one day you look up and you're holding a full jar." Thank you to everybody in this room, because at some point you've helped to make that marble jar full for me. That's what's in your envelope, not a Malteser. Thank you very much. Sit down.
Well, thank you so much, Leigh. That was just a fascinating talk. We're going to have some time for questions, and we've got a microphone, roving microphones, perfect. Just a couple of observations from me in terms of what I'll take away from that inspirational overview is Leigh's narrative about her journey through higher education and the pedagogy of practice and the way we can apply pedagogy to new knowledge. The influence of individuals, key individuals throughout your own lifetimes, and what impact that can have on your own personal development. It's so lovely to see so many people who've influenced you, Leigh, here tonight. I've learnt 2 new words, Imagineering and...
Disney.
Oh, copyright Disney, and opportunity, which I've never heard before, so that's great. It's great to hear more about those links with industry and BASF, and it's great to see colleagues here this evening. But for me, the real key to the lecture tonight was that influence on the curriculum, that influence in the classroom that has come about through the work of CAPE over the years with your colleagues in this room tonight. I was really taken by that sense of fostering hope with young people and children, and that really strikes to the heart of this university's commitment to education for hope, and that's that commitment to widening access and social mobility. And your talk there, Leigh, about context being so important, that really resonates with me personally, so thank you for that. Pedagogical superpower, I love that, especially with a cape. I thought that was brilliant. So just a few comments from me, but it's now an opportunity to ask you, the audience, to ask questions. So we have got a microphone. We are online, so there may be some questions that come online, and we'll try and feed those in as well. So over to you. Who would be the first to start a question? We've got a question here online, I think.
Hi, I'm Ed, so hi Leigh, a colleague of Leigh here at LTU. I've got a question about the national curriculum. Sorry. It seems to me that thinking about curriculum has been taken off the table in many ways of chalk face teachers. There's lots of centralisation of curriculum planning, and in some places to a very large effect. And also, as a nation, we haven't thought about the national curriculum very much at all in the last 10 years. And I just wondered whether you think we do need, in order to achieve some of these things that you want us to achieve, I think we all want to achieve, I wonder whether you think we need to think again about the national curriculum and about the way we talk to trainees and early career teachers about curricula.
I think what we need to do is recognise that schools have the answer already, because actually the majority, certainly what I can say is that every school that is worked with within CAPE does not have a centralised, this is how you will teach this, because that doesn't align with our principles. So the schools that we do work with, whilst they might have an approach, they recognise the context of the different schools within the MAT. I don't think the curriculum is necessarily broken. I think we've got what we've got, and would we change it? Yes, of course we would. And when the next one comes in, we will want to change that as well. I think it's about teachers and probably more importantly, school leaders enabling the teachers to be brave with the curriculum, to recognise it as a minimum entitlement, to be able to look at actually how can I make this work for the children and young people in front of me. And I think we do that to an extent. What we're now saying is actually, can you do this with a climate change education lens, which is different and it's a big ask. So I don't think, well, I don't think we need to radicalise what's happening. I think that would be possibly more destabilising for our children and young people. But I think we do need to strip back. And I think the problem that we have is a number of teachers and our students never look at the national curriculum, do they? They look at a dilution or a distillation of it when they see a scheme of work or a medium-term plan or a long-term, you know, whatever it is. They're not going back to that nuts and bolts of how can I draw upon my experiences to make this a really lived thing for the children in front of me.
In the middle over there, with a pen
With a pen.
in the air.
Hi, my name's Sue. I don't know you. I work in a sixth form college. I've always been interested sort of in the same idea as the national curriculum and wondering how much influence you through the ASE or through the university could have on, for example, exam boards. I've done an audit of the A-levels curricula that run in our college, and there is some sort of like acknowledgement of climate issues, but it's very minor, and I've tried and talk to my team leaders about how they can introduce these sorts of ideas across English, across art, like you said, and everybody's quite up for it. Everybody's very positive, but at the end of the day, they always feel constrained by the curriculum. Yeah. So if we could get the QCA to demand that we taught this, then maybe we're all due A-level curriculum changes. Maybe that would be a driver. Yeah. Can you influence that?
I'll see what I can do. I think this. I'm torn on this because we all have it within our gift to be able to teach the standing national curriculum with examples and draw upon experience of climate change education. If we make it something that is absolutely assessed, I go back to the drugs example. Do we give the children and young people the knowledge that they need to make informed decisions? It's a little bit like, what if we made it that Ofsted we're going to make some judgment based on the extent to which you are enabling these children and young people to become protectors of this planet. And again, the danger with that is it becomes a tick box. So the answer, again, it's messy, it's not straightforward. The Cambridge University Press and Assessment are part of CAPE. We're having discussions with Pearson. There are people who are influencing what happens. We've also got, I know of 4 different bodies that have created primary science national curricula for, in the event of there being a government change, that they can go, here, we have got this. I'm not sure that's the answer. Would it give it more heft? Absolutely. No, we're not going to say don't include it. But I think we've got to be really clear about what we want as the outcome. And I'm not sure that teaching, it being forced into being taught, is necessarily going to result in the outcomes that we need, which are those really informed, nuanced, complex decisions that we need our children and young people to make.
There's a hand over here. Is that you? Yeah. Thank you.
Oh.
Do you have any advice for people, your best piece of advice you've collected?
Don't.
Thank you.
No, I think, do you know, Lewis, you know that it's about taking the opportunities, it's about being brave. It's really difficult because people have a finite amount of time. And I absolutely get that. And you try to be everything for everyone and it doesn't always work. But I think finding somebody who can be a real champion of what you're trying to do. I've not had that in work. I've never had that person who's really been sort of pushing to get me to do things until very recently, until I've been here. I think you take your journey. You've been in higher education for 2 years. You've published. You're doing all of the right things because you've been championed. And I think people should try and find that person who can support and help make the decisions, because you don't necessarily know what's right, what's the best move. So as a result, I've just said yes to everything, and sometimes it's worked and sometimes it's not. But that would be my advice, that you find a champion, you find somebody that you can trust, that's more than a mentor, that's really going to support you in going forward.
Hi, I'm Steve. I'm a professor in the business school. So it's a comment and a question, if that's okay, Leigh. So my first comment is, please don't apologise for being a professor who is not a researcher. I think we need far more people in positions like yours who have got practical and professional experience and combine that with academic knowledge. And I think that Leeds Trinity is a trailblazer in that. We've got several colleagues like yourself. So please don't apologise.
Thank
It's
you.
basically my comment there. Having said that, it's not always easy, is it, for people with that sort of experience to get into your position. So 2 questions really is what would be your advice to somebody who's got that professional background? It could be in business, not necessarily in education, who wants to make their way to the level that you've reached. And secondly, if I'm allowed, Malcolm, what do you think that institutions like Leeds Trinity and other higher education institutions could do to actually make it the case that more people like you are stood in that position giving an inaugural lecture? Thanks.
I think we need to be... I'm going to have to try and remember all these. I think we've got to be really mindful that it isn't just practice on its own. You know, there's a lot behind that. Whilst I may not be doing a lot of the research, the work that I'm doing is very much based on that. So it's about having that interaction and that engagement and understanding that these things do not exist in isolation, which sort of feeds into that entanglement, messy sort of situation, isn't it? And I think it's about absolutely being bold in what you're doing and trying to get out there, trying to have that external presence, that influence, working with the people that matter. I love the days that I spend with school teachers and school leaders and get to talk about this stuff that really matters. And it's about, I suppose, having the confidence to be in that space and be able to talk about that research and bring it to those people in the same way that we distill things for our students or our pupils. It's about trying to make that really tangible for our colleagues as well.
Hi Leigh.
Hello, Helen.
I'm Councillor Helen Hayden. I'm the Executive Member for Sustainable Development and Infrastructure in Leeds. Yes, I'm the one that closes the roads. So apologies if your journey back is a bit of a nightmare. Mine was coming here. But I taught our religious education for 16 years in Leeds and Bradford in high schools after doing my PGCE here. So I'm really interested in making climate education very personal to children. I taught in one of the most deprived areas that I now represent of Leeds, and it's not the top priority for those children. Having food on the table when you get home is the top priority, and also making it very relevant to what's going on in their lives and what's going on in Leeds. I'm also very, very aware of conspiracy theories, and that, you know, my dad says this isn't real and that sort of thing, and I get accosted on the street telling me that I'm going to keep people in their neighbourhoods, and I have, by very experienced politicians, been likened a big sister. So I was wanting to have your opinion on addressing those conspiracies, those anti-climate messages with our children, whilst making it very relevant and important to them. But I'm very passionate about, you retrofit a home, you improve life chances, educational outputs, immediately you improve their health outcomes, and that's tackling climate change as well.
Yeah.
So I just want your opinion on that.
I think, yeah, this comes back to that, the principles that I said around curriculum, really. I think it's about what we've got to do is ensure that our children are exposed to as many opportunities to engage with climate change education in their context where they can see themselves within it. We can't just tell them that they're wrong. The overwhelming evidence is climate change is a thing. It's real. It's happening now, and has been happening for some time. And I think it's about how we craft our teaching to enable them to be able to see themselves, and making sure that the solutions that we are positioning aren't out of reach for them. That it can be that, you know, this is a thing that we can do. This is about understanding the decisions that we make where we can influence what's happening.
It's a question online from Paul Tyler, who has asked, just scroll back up, how do we develop children's global perspective so that they can start to gain an understanding of themselves as global citizens who are part of a global solution?
Yeah, and this is the balance, isn't it? Because the children will be able to tell you anything about polar bears and melting ice caps and the poor fluffy polar bears, and but that's so detached from them, isn't it? But we also need to realise that actually those vulnerabilities that we see across global south are really mirrored in those communities. So it's about how do we ensure that, as well as having that, this is me, I am part of this is happening to me and I have the solution, or are part of that solution, that we also see this is not just about me and my street, this is about a global impact. And it's that's really, really difficult to expect our children to be able to grasp that concept, because they can't imagine that. So it's about really being clear in terms of how we introduce them to that knowledge, how we first of all make them care enough about the planet to be able to want to save it, and then move forward with that sort of bigger picture.
John.
I'll be very brief because I think you've just answered part of my question in responding to Paul. We've talked about this before, Leigh. In my view, you can't avoid getting political when you talk about climate, because at the individual level, you know, we can switch our heating down and insulate our homes and so on, and it's trivial. It's absolutely trivial compared to the forces that are extra-governmental, that are not controlled by governments, actually, that they're controlled by corporations, that enhance anthropogenic climate change. And so my question is this, and it's a tough one, but how do we engage with being overtly political? Because the planet requires us to do this. Mm-hmm. We can't afford to, you know, just wait for this generation to grow up and hope everything will be okay. Tuvalu will be gone by then. So how do we introduce politics into schools in the current climate?
Is it that we need to, I'm going to throw a question back at you, John. Is it that we need to introduce the politics into school, or do we need our school leaders to advocate for the politics that will ultimately make a difference? I don't know that we know what these children already have to worry about. And I guess my guard is, do we want to have them fighting a political fight before they have the knowledge and skills to be able to understand the actions that they can take to make a difference in the planet, which potentially doesn't answer your question. I think it comes down to, and the school leaders in the room who are probably going to have a word with me after this, but I think it comes down to actually having a collective voice and actually standing up to what the DFE are saying, going, do you know what, this isn't good enough. It's not enough. We need this on the agenda. We need this to make a difference. Is that okay?
To Amy in the third row, Amy, please. I think after this we've probably got time for one more question. If there's any.
The wine is getting warm, people. It's climate change right out there.
Blimey, Leigh. I work with Leigh every day, and I know a lot of what you're doing, but I'm blown away by how much you're taking on and how much you've done. It's making me a little bit tearful, actually. But I wanted to ask, you're doing all of this, you're doing so much with colleagues and with friends. What can we do at Leeds Trinity to support what you're doing? Because what you haven't told everybody is about your day job, which has nothing to do with any of that you're also managing and is also more than a full-time job. So what can we do to support you?
Could do with some money. CAPE exists on it's hilarious. People out there in other institutions think, they keep sort of saying to Hina, where do you get the money from? And we go, we've not got any. Right, we genuinely don't. It's the relationships that have made us exist the way that we do. We have had some funding from LTU. It's so difficult. Hina and I talk about this a lot because she's also got a full-time PhD. She's undertaking in climate change education. She's quite useful to have around. And we go, how do we do this? Because it is absolutely on top of our day jobs. We've just written our second report, which is due to be launched in January. It's another 15,000 words that we've written in the evenings over 2 weeks, because that's what we have to do. I don't know what my ask of you could possibly be. We need practical stuff. We need admin support. We need something that can buy us the time that we're not during the. Are you volunteering for admin support? Excellent. Speak to Hina. It's about that. What I would really like is for it to become a focus within teacher education. Lewis has undertaken the Climate Wise programme. We want to see this as something that filters in. University of Reading do this really quite successfully in a number of subjects that you wouldn't necessarily think, I want that for here. That could be that's the best thing that I could hope for, and as a result of the work that we're putting in.
Thank you. We've got one last question for Jennifer at the back.
I'm Jack, I'm one of Lee's former students and now science subject lead in my school. How do you think is the best way to approach this with school leaders who maybe don't see this as a priority? And because I only feel for myself there's only so much I can do as a science subject lead without support further up the school structure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and that's not an easy answer there. We're very privileged to work with school leaders who already are aware that something needs to change. We know that there's a tipping point in society or in any community where things then start to become the thing that people want to do because everybody else is doing it, and that's around sort of 25%. That would be a really ambitious target for Hina and I on our own to achieve, but we're there. That's our aim. I think it's about that campaign of, we've got to do this. Use your pupil voice. Ask your children what they want. And I can almost guarantee they're going to come back. They're going to mirror those statistics that we saw earlier. And what stronger power have you got as a teacher to go and say, our children are asking for this. This is what they want. This is what they need. And it's not about curriculum overhaul. It's about where can we meaningfully start to teach it through this lens. I'm more than happy to help if you want that.
Great, and what a great note to end on. Colleagues, before I hand over to Professor Alex Nunn, can we just show our appreciation to Professor Leigh Hoath?
What a great talk. I wouldn't be a professor if I didn't abuse the privilege of a microphone for just 1 minute or two. I was struck by when you were talking, I wrote down the word relationships, and then you went on to explicitly talk about relationships. But the thing I was really struck about that was how many of those relationships you spoke about as friendships. And you also said about how important it was to be authentic. And I don't think anybody in the room who knows Leigh will question the fact that those relationships are friendships. And I was struck also by your role as a connector of ideas, but also a connector of stakeholders, policymakers, researchers, students, children, parents, teachers, connecting all those bits of the structure together. Now, I used the words research at the start, and I used the word research community, and I did that advisedly. So research is a process of creating new knowledge and sharing it effectively. I don't think there'll be anybody in the room that questions the fact that the topic you talked about tonight was the most important topic on any of our agendas. And while it's important, I'm not going to question the notion of importance of producing new knowledge about climate change. But what I am going to say is, more than new knowledge, we need more people connecting that knowledge to people in authentic ways through relationships that can generate progressive action on that subject. So I'm sure I don't speak just for me, and I'm sure everybody in part of our research community here at Leeds Trinity to say how proud and grateful I am that we've got Professor Leigh Hoath in that community doing that work. So please, one more round of applause. I'm slightly questioning the idea that the wine's going warm, given what I know about the temperature out there, but it is now my really pleasurable job to invite you to come and share some refreshments with us. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for coming online as well.